Hey guys, today we're going to go over how to use presets properly. The way of taking a MIDI with your presets and kind of making it fit as chords, top leads, or bass. Taking the preset out of box and kind of altering it a certain way for it to fit professionally in your mix. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And for this example, I took a MIDI from our pack in Vandalism just to get the process sped up a little more so we don't have to worry about making a chord progression because that can take a little longer. But today we're mainly going to focus on the sounds and the presets and how to shift and mold them from one of our sample banks to put them into chords and top leads. So let's get right to it. So you guys can see here, I just have the MIDI up top and I just dragged it down a couple times to open up a couple more channels so we can start layering. But out of the box, the MIDI is going to sound like this. So that's our chord structure, just our MIDI that we got from our pack from Vandalism that we're just going to use for this example. And I'm going to go through Silent. Shocking Sounds 21 specifically is the bank I'm going to be using today. And mainly what I want to do is go through certain leads and sounds that are going to fit for a chord and that are going to fit for a pluck or fit for a top lead to start kind of balancing out the layers and starting to make them sound professionally and a little fuller, because you don't really want to just grab a preset and let it sit there. Even though these presets, of course, are sounding very, very good out of the box, they're not mainly for that. They're there for inspiration and they're there for guidance to make you take them to another level. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's go through the presets and kind of find specifically a pluck that sounds exactly like this that I like already, and then we'll start there. All right, so I love that sound there. It's already great, but what I want to do as far as that being a pluck sound, I really just want to use the top end of the note. So I'm going to go into the MIDI specifically just for this layer, and I'm going to mute all the bottom chord notes out. So we don't need any of those. I'm just going to use the very top notes. And I'm going to open up the Pro Q2 right away, and I'm going to roll off any low end there that's in the mix, that's in that patch. And we're just bringing the mids and the highs out a little more in that preset because it's really strong as is. As far as the reverb, I'm going to actually mute that off, and I'm going to go into Valhalla, which you can see over here, and I'm going to use that to control my reverb. Yeah, that's sounding good. I'll bypass that off. So there's the regular sound. So we can start to mess with the oscillators a little bit. As far as this sound, I want it kind of basic. I want it to be the pluck of the top lead. And then I'm going to layer this with the top lead and also a cello to give a little bit more of an organic feel. And then I'm also going to balance out my chords with a few sounds. You can see there on B1, I'm adding a little bit of a noise oscillator, which is already there, just to bring it up a little bit in the mix to make sure that noise is there and that crunch in the high end is there. And I'm just going to change a filter type out so I can control this a little more. And then I'm going to just change the portamento. Out of the box, this sound had a little bit of a glide with the portamento from note to note. I'm going to make that be completely at 0, so it's very, very straightforward with the sound. And you can see down in LFO 1, I'm just adding a pitch AB so I can then take the oscillator there and kind of create more of a wobble effect to create a little bit more of a different sound. All right, so that's sounding great already, that pluck sound. So we're going to name that our pluck layer. And we're going to move on to a few chords, which I have dialed in here already, just loaded up so we can dive into the presets and go through those. first thing I'm going to do with this preset, I like this one already, just being a nice standard saw. I like the noise crunch that's already in there in the oscillator, so use that to your advantage as far as the high end that's going to need to be in there. I'm going to go down to part, let's see where that sine is. I heard a sine. Yeah, right here, part B2. I can hear a little sine inside the oscillators. Once I filter down, you can hear that B come alive. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And then we can open the filter back up so it's full. And you can see down here, I have just the same chords drawn in, but I've added a pitch bend just to speed things up. I want a pitch bend on that held out note just to change the MIDI a little bit along with the preset. You can see the bend range. I usually take the presets right out of initially when I'm sifting through them. I always switch the bend range right away to 12 just so I can get going on the pitch bending if anything, because it sounds better going a full octave. All right, the next step I want to go with the Q2 just to dial in a little bit on the low end there, and I want to do a little mid-side EQing on the chords so I can control them and make them a little more center and cleaner. All right, so you can see down here I have the mid-side option switched on the Q2. Again, I control the mid-side and the depth of the sound rather than just a stereo going left and right. There's a lot more to sound than that, which unfortunately is something a lot of people miss. So dig into mid-side if you can and really learn about it. So what I'm going to do is switch on the side option here, and I'm going to sweep that to the right so you can hear fully the sound going more center rather than the stereo. Hear that depth. I mean, it's incredible what mid-side can do. It's really essential to cleaning up certain sounds and putting them where they're supposed to sit in the mix down and in the layer. So for a chord like this saw, I want it to sit a little tighter and center as opposed to a full wider lead sound. So I'm going to put the chords a little tighter with this side function. And without that sounds. So you can see that subtle 2% difference, but it's going to be a huge difference when you keep layering stuff, because now this is sitting specifically where it's supposed to sit, and now we can take other elements and kind of build those on the side to start forming a bigger sound. So let's go to just our next one down here and just find more of a little thicker saw chord that can fit to kind of go with that sound. So we'll open up Silent. We'll start at the beginning here. Yeah, faded. This faded patch is very good for this saw chord sound because it's a very analog saw sound. It's really basic, but that's really what's best. When that saw is super basic and clean, it really kind of brings the fullness out in the mid. So we're going to use that to complement this channel 2 up here. I'm just going to make sure I have the noise dialed in on this one. And we'll take the reverb off that. I like that sound. Since it's going to be sitting in the back of this main chord, I want that a little bit more dry. You can turn it down, put it in the back a little more as far as the mix down goes. And you guys can hear that I've added down here on LFO 1, I just opened up the pitch AB, which was not initially here, really what I want to do is just add a little bit of a wobble to the LFO, to the held out note, just to change the chords up a little bit. And you'll hear that between measure 2 and 3. So you can hear that little bit of wobble. Again, that's a nice little just addition to the chords to make them kind of move a little more, along with the pitch bend option that's there. So it's kind of bringing them a little bit more of a unique flair. So those are sounding great so far, the chords. What I did in the mixer is actually took these two chords together and I bust them over to aux 4 so I can use those two together and compress them all at once. So you can hear that on this channel here. So they're being processed through the CLA 3A from Waves, along with an SPL transient to bring out the sharp plucks and initial attack of the sound, so it just has a little bit more presence. And lastly, the direction mixer. I believe every DAW has this, where you can kind of just shape a simple, the simple stereo signal. You can do this with Isotope too. Logic just has a nice built-in mixer where I can just tighten up the signal just a little more and making it a little bit more centered. So that's what we did here. So that's without any of the processing. You can hear the great, pretty much a huge difference. We're applying the same Q2 from chord 1, which is this one up here. We're applying the same rule with the Q2 down to chord 2 as far as the mid side. So we're kind of sucking in the stereo signal a little bit more center with this chord 2. So those are sounding really balanced so far. Let's see how they're sitting with the pluck. So that's sitting really nice on top the pluck. So next thing I want to dive into is taking those top notes and building the top lead a little bit, because the chords are sounding full to me. You can see right out of the box, not too much processing, because there's a good amount of simplicity going on with the preset. Again, don't really abuse and just use a preset out of box. Do a couple things with EQing and compression if it's needed, depending on the preset and where it's sitting in as the layers. Kind of go trial and error and see what fits, but you can see how simple these few things are out of box with the presets and how we're taking to make them a little bit more of a proper sound. So that top lead, I want to take a different sound that's going to hit, which the one you heard there, a little bit more dominant and a little bit more heard in the mix. So that's why I went with this last words one, and I'll show you what I did here. Make sure the portamento's down. I really want that coming through with the transient again, with the pluck. I want that really heard. But mainly what I want to do with this sound is make it a little bit wider, because again, remember what we did with the chords when we brought those into a tighter setting. Now we've opened up space in the spectrum to really let the chords kind of hold into the mid, but let the leads really have that wide sound. So that's kind of what we did. So now I can go to the side setting and go from the mid to high in this lead and boost that to make the reverb heard a little bit further left and right. And there's just a little bit too much detune for what I want, so I'm going to bring that back a little bit more of a cleaner. Now, really what you want to look for when you're grabbing a preset, of course, try to hear it in your head up front. If there's a certain sound you're going for, try to envision it, because it will help you a little bit. But if you're kind of confused where you're going with the layers, really just dive into the different type of waves: sine, saw, triangle, pulse, all that square. Really go through each, because each is going to have a different phase and a different sound, of course. So go through each of them while you're sitting there with a preset and you'll start hearing them kind of mix themselves differently with the other layers. So really take your time with that, and you'll really teach yourself whether you don't want to use a saw as opposed to a sine. You'll really start to find the ones that you like. And I'm going to turn off the reverb in the preset, and I'm going to use Valhalla for this one just to control a little bit more of the left to right. And without any of that, this is what it sounds like. And for this one, I'm going to add a Maserati plugin from Waves to give a little bit more crunch to the sound and a little more character, just to drive it a little more of a distortion feel. You can hear without it, it's still there and sounding good, but the Maserati brings out that side that we did in the EQ. It just brings it to life a little more. So you can see with those 4 simple layers that we used, the presets out of box, again, Shocking Sounds 21, you can see the ones we used that are really not too much tweaking, but we're using them properly in a professional level. We're not just letting them sit as a preset, because again, the presets are not meant to be there to just, put them in. They're there for inspiration, and you need to take them to the next level, which is what we're doing here with this simple EQing and the couple compression things that we did with the bussing of the chords. Next, I want to go to Outside of Silence to add a cello from Contact. And I'm going to take out the pitch bend in this one. I really want this to sit full with the pluck in the top. And the thing with the cello, or if a violin or string you're working with, make sure it's really sitting nice and eerie in the mix. So we'll make sure that's kind of EQ'd properly with the Q2. Roll off any of the low end there because you don't really need it in the cello. I'm just going to cut that out. And I'm going to open up Contact and go to a little different. So you can see how it's kind of getting a talk feel to the cello and the saw. It's giving more life, which is exactly what we want. And it's a really simple layer, but if you're layering your synths with cellos and more organic, guitars, for example, you're starting to make things come to life a little more and kind of developing a better sound rather than a simple preset and saw all the time. And just to turn off all the processing real quick to hear that kind of from ground 1, it would sound like this. It's still there, it's full, but take it to another level, which is what we did in the 20 minutes of just applying these simple steps. Maserati, Q2, tightening up the mid side, which is so important, and you just get a more of a finished polish overall mix down. So that's sounding really good, and then you can apply some sidechain to make it sit a little better if you want with the chords, and then get into that to make it kind of bounce off the kick, which is what I would essentially do next as I was producing the record. But just apply these same rules we went over as far as using the presets to then diving into your bass line. Go into your sine sub, your mid, bass line, and your high. Do the exact same thing we did with developing the top lead, the pluck, and the chords. It's really going to be the same idea, just finding the right sounds to do that. So dive in, give this a shot. Let us know how it turns out, and also always let us know if you have any questions. And we'll see you guys next time.